Well, thank you for the good news. Director Haynes, you said we're never been better prepared. Ms. Easterly, you said our elections have never been more secure. I think that's good news. All the campaigns I've been involved in my career and or observed as a citizen have never been exemplars of truth-telling. They are contests, political contests for the hearts and minds of the voters and hopefully the ballot cast by that voter. And I frankly don't think it makes a whole lot of difference if it's some message is generated by some computer code or algorithm or artificial intelligence or a human being that is not telling the truth, or some third party like these 51 intelligence officials who basically shared in a lie, attributing certain information in election to Russian disinformation. I actually found also, Ms. Easterly, I found this statement in your statement to be reassuring. You said, our election infrastructure is diverse, managed locally by state and local government offices to meet their unique jurisdictional requirements, and involves in-depth layers of defense and redundancies to ensure security and resilience. It is because of these measures and the incredible efforts of election workers across the country that the American people can have confidence in the security of our elections process. Again, more good news. As I read that, though, it seems to suggest that the distributed nature of our election system is actually a strength against attempts to disrupt our election process. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So any attempt by federal officials here in Washington, D.C. to centralize or concentrate that election authority would seem to me to run counter to that distributed structure, which is providing some defense against attempts to disrupt or interfere with our elections. That's my observation, not necessarily yours. So I was very encouraged to see that the work you've done with chief election officials in places like Texas and elsewhere, the training, the assessments, the resources you provided have been successful and led you to believe that we have never been more secure. Let me ask you, maybe Ms. Knapp, I don't know who should take this question, but one of the biggest challenges we've had when it comes to elections or cyber attacks basically have been attribution. How do we know what the source of some of this information or cyber attacks, let's say, how do we know who it is?
Thank you for that question, sir. I can certainly start, and then I'm sure my colleagues would love to jump in. As you had mentioned, sir, attribution is a difficult thing, but it is not something that is impossible, and it takes time. So for us, from an FBI perspective, that would involve us tracing the origin. We would gather all available intelligence. We would serve legal process. It's an iterative process.
So that's not something you could do in real time, let's say, against the deadline or backdrop of an election date?
Well, it would depend. It would depend on how easy it is to have attribution. It would also depend on what sort of available intelligence is out there driving us to come to whatever conclusion. But I don't know if any of my colleagues want to jump in on this.
And Ms. Director Haynes, does the U.S. government do anything to impose costs against those who engage in this misconduct?
I mean, obviously that's a policy question, but yes, obviously there have been actions that have been taken, sanctions or other.
It may be a policy question, but you would know.
Yeah, fair enough. No. I mean, I think, sanctions are an example of the kinds of actions that have been taken, PNGing, other actions depending on the particular scenario. And we've also seen, as we've been helping, for example, Europe look at Russian efforts to influence the European Parliament elections, they've been taking certain actions in response to some of those influence operations. So I do think there are, in fact, tools that can be used, and others may wish to join.
I just have 17 seconds left. Let me change the subject a little bit. We've talked about virtual threats to election integrity, but not physical threats from terrorist groups. Director Haynes, you said in your annual threat assessment you're willing to acknowledge that perceptions of immigration policies are driving record numbers of illegal immigrants across our borders. Director Haynes also talked about the ISIS-affiliated individuals that are facilitating the passage of migrants to the U.S.-Mexican border and into the United States. Can you tell us in open session how many illegal immigrants have ties to ISIS operatives? And does the IC assess that individuals with those connections have entered the United States through the southern border, as Director Wray has testified?
I can support what Director Wray has testified to publicly, but I can't answer your specific questions in open session, but we can obviously have further discussions.
You can't tell us what he told us, which is ISIS facilitators have managed to deliver people to the southern border, and they have likely been released into the United States?
There is a facilitation network that we have been monitoring, obviously, that has some links to ISIS, and that is something that we have been managing, but I can't go further into detail on that without being in closed session, sir.
Well, I think we are looking at a matter of when, if not if, we're going to have to live with the consequences of that.
Two quick comments before we go to Senator Bennett. One, I do think as policymakers, and I think there have been times in the past when we have punched back against some of those who try to interfere, and I think we ought to do more of that and try to urge as policymakers that action. And I would also say I want to commend, some of this point you made with Jen about the decentralized nature. I want to applaud Texas, which in an overwhelming way, I think almost unanimous in your state house and 75%, I think, in your state Senate, approved legislation that the Governor Abbott side prohibiting deepfakes of political candidates. I think that makes a lot of sense.